The aroma of roasted flesh and exotic spices filled the grand chamber, mingling with the clink of crystal goblets and the guttural laughter of the galaxy's most powerful rulers. The celestial throne, a fortress of opulence orbiting a dying star, pulsed with decadence. Chandeliers of bioluminescent creatures drifted lazily in the vaulted ceiling, casting an eerie glow over tables laden with the bounty of 1,000 conquered worlds. Elias Voss moved among the shadows of servitude, his white-clad form blending seamlessly with the other human attendants. To the rulers, he was nothing, a nameless figure tasked with ensuring their pleasure. They did not know his name, nor did they care. The thought amused him. He had once been a scientist, a man who had studied the nature of life itself. Now, he was simply the chef, an unseen hand in their gluttonous indulgence. He set down a silver tray of dark, glistening meat before the supreme sovereign, whose bulk sprawled across a throne-like chair of carved obsidian. The sovereign's form was a grotesque mockery of nature, flesh layered over shifting, chitinous plates, eyes sunken but predatory, mandibles twitching in anticipation. His kind, the Zarvok, had led the subjugation of humanity, stripping Earth of its dignity, its sovereignty, its very name. The supreme sovereign's gaze flicked toward Elias, but dismissed him just as quickly. Good. That was how he had survived this long. Invisible, obedient, watching, asterisk asterisk. Across the chamber, laughter erupted as a Hecary noble swiped a clawed hand through a dish of crystalline fruit, scattering shards across the floor. A human servant knelt to clean the mess, her hands trembling. Elias recognized her. Lena. She had once been an engineer, a mind that had crafted machines to defy gravity. Now, she scraped food from the feet of those who had destroyed her world. The Hecary sneered. They breed them fragile. His voice was thick with contempt. Like vermin, another alien added, a Vrexy whose segmented body curled around its chair. Soft bones, soft minds. A low murmur of amusement spread through the table. Elias turned away before his hatred could betray him. Not yet. Tonight was the culmination of 6 years of patience, of study, of careful manipulation. The poison was already working its way through their bodies, disguised within the sumptuous feast. A human creation, a final, mocking gift to those who had thought themselves untouchable. A Zarvok dignitary gnawed at a hunk of marbled meat, his mandibles clicking with pleasure. This, he declared, is the finest cut I have tasted. Elias gave a small bow. It is an honor to serve. The dignitary laughed. A human with manners? A rare thing. He did not flinch, did not betray the satisfaction curling in his gut. The poison was subtle, designed to mimic intoxication at first. Warmth in the limbs, a pleasant fog in the mind. By the time they realized the truth, it would be too late. He moved back to the kitchens, where the other human slaves worked in near silence, eyes downcast. The air was thick with the scent of spices, but beneath it, Elias could almost taste the tension. They knew. Lena slipped through the doorway, her hands still shaking. It's done. Her voice was barely a whisper. He gave a slight nod. Her shoulders sagged with relief, but her eyes darted toward the grand hall, where their captors feasted in blissful ignorance. How long? Minutes, Elias murmured. Some will feel it sooner than others. She clenched her hands. And the sovereign. Elias exhaled slowly. The supreme sovereign species had a metabolism unlike the others. The poison would take longer to cripple him, but Elias had anticipated that. The dosage in his meal had been adjusted accordingly. A slow death, befitting a creature that had spent centuries enslaving others. A loud, sudden cough shattered the revelry in the chamber beyond. The first sign. A hush followed. Elias could picture them now, frowning, confused, try to brush it off. The moment before panic. Then came the second cough. This time, a racking, wet sound. A goblet shattered. A chair scraped violently against the floor. He and Lena stepped to the edge of the doorway, watching as the first body slumped forward, a Hecari noble whose golden skin had darkened to a sickly hue. Another let out a sharp hiss, clutching at his throat as his breathing turned ragged. The room erupted. "What is this?" Avrexy shrieked, its segmented body spasming as it collapsed. The Supreme Sovereign's eyes snapped toward the suffering around him. His mandibles flared in anger. "What trickery is this?" His voice reverberated through the chamber, thick with power and rage. Elias felt the moment they understood. Their gazes turned toward the humans. The fragile, conquered species. The ones who served them. The ones who had brought them their food. Realization dawned, raw and terrible. A Zarvok noble staggered to his feet, pointing a trembling claw. "The humans." His words died in a choking gurgle as his throat constricted. Lena whispered, "They know." They did. But it did not matter. There was no cure. The Supreme Sovereign rose, his massive frame looming over the table. Unlike the others, his body resisted the poison's effects, but his movements were slower, more sluggish. His rage burned through the haze clouding his mind, and his gaze locked onto Elias with chilling precision. "You," he snarled. Elias felt the weight of the moment pressed down on him. For the first time in his life, a Zarvok knew his name. He should have felt fear. Instead, he smiled. "Enjoy your meal, Supreme Sovereign." The Sovereign lunged, but Elias was already moving. The chaos was spreading, screams and broken bodies littering the grand hall. Now was the moment. Now was their chance. Lena had already slipped away, vanishing into the servant corridors to begin the next phase. Security systems disabled. Escape routes cleared. Asterisk asterisk. Elias turned on his heel and ran, leaving the Sovereign behind. Tonight, the galaxy's masters would fall, and humanity would rise. The Supreme Sovereign's roar split the air, a sound that sent shivers through the towering obsidian pillars of the celestial throne. His massive form trembled with rage, clawed hands bracing against the feast table as his body resisted the poison that had already begun ravaging the other rulers. The chamber was collapsing into pure chaos. Elias Voss ran. His boots pounded against the polished floors as he weaved through the servant corridors, Lena just ahead of him. The sound of guttural choking and frantic shouts followed them, the realization of their betrayal sinking into the dying rulers like the poison itself, slow, inevitable, and final. "Security will be on us in moments," Lena whispered between hurried breaths, her face pale but determined. Elias glanced at the datapad strapped to his forearm. The encrypted virus he had uploaded into the station's control systems was still spreading, disabling communications, triggering false alarms across different levels, and overriding key security functions. The Sovereign's elite guards would still come, but they would be disorganized, uncertain. That was the only advantage they had. A distant explosion rumbled through the station. Not from them. Not yet. The slaves in the lower levels were rising. Elias fought the urge to stop, to listen. Years of planning had led to this moment. He had dreamed of the day when humanity would strike back, when the chains of their oppressors would be shattered. But now that it was happening, there was no time to savor it. Survival came first. Victory came later. Asterisk asterisk. They turned a corner, entering the weapons vault. A sleek, sterile room filled with racks of plasma rifles and shock batons. Lena moved quickly, strapping a compact rifle across her back and securing 2 energy grenades to her belt. "If we make it to the docking bay, the others are waiting." Elias loaded a pistol. The weight felt strange in his hands. He was not a soldier. He had fought his war with chemicals and deception. But that war was over. Now it was this war, the kind fought with blood and fire. The door behind them slammed open. 2 guards, their forms blurred by active camouflage, rushed in with bladed weapons drawn. Lena twisted to avoid the first strike, her movements faster than Elias could process. The second guard lunged toward him, the glinting edge of a plasma dagger catching the dim light. Elias fired. The shot struck the alien's neck, sending it crashing to the floor in a convulsing heap. He had never killed before. He had imagined it 1,000 times, thought of how it would feel, wondered if it would sicken him. It didn't. Lena had already dispatched her attacker, panting as she wiped the blood from her cheek. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Can you keep doing that?" He flexed his fingers around the pistol. "If I have to." A distant alarm blared. They didn't wait to see what was coming. They ran. The corridors were a twisting labyrinth, once pristine and controlled, now filled with fleeing nobles and panicked guards. Some of the rulers had survived the initial poisoning, those with stronger metabolisms, those who had only sipped their wine before realizing the trap. They stumbled, disoriented, issuing frantic orders into dead communication lines. A Hekari noble spotted Elias and snarled, raising an energy staff. "You filth!" Lena shot him in the throat. The docking bay was close now, the sealed blast doors just ahead. If they could make it through, they would reach the stolen transport where the others waited. The rest of the humans, former slaves, fighters, survivors, had been preparing for this for weeks. Then the air itself shifted, a presence, a weight pressing down on the space around them. The Supreme Sovereign stepped into view. The other rulers were weak, some already dead, others gasping in the halls, but the Sovereign had not fallen. His massive form was slower now, his skin taking on a strange, unnatural sheen as his body fought the poison. But his eyes, his burning, ancient eyes, were filled with pure, unrelenting hate. Elias stopped breathing. The Sovereign did not lunge. He did not roar. He simply moved, and it was too fast. A clawed hand lashed out. Lena was lifted off the ground, her rifle clattering to the floor. The Sovereign's talons dug into her shoulder, not deep enough to kill, but enough to hold her in place. She screamed, struggling, kicking, but his grip was unshakable. Elias raised his pistol, but the Sovereign's other hand struck him like a hammer, sending him sprawling. His skull cracked against the cold metal floor, and the world blurred at the edges. The Sovereign tightened his grip on Lena, studying her like one might an insect pinned beneath glass. His voice was lethal calm. "You think this is your victory?" His words vibrated through the air, each syllable thick with contempt. "You have poisoned our empire, butchered our kind, and you call us monsters." Lena choked, her hands clawing at his grip. The pain in her eyes was not fear, but rage. "You made us this," she spat. "You thought we were weak, thought we were nothing. And now look at you." The Sovereign tightened his hold, and she screamed. Elias forced himself up, vision spinning. The pistol was still in his grasp, shaking, useless. If he fired, he might hit Lena. If he did nothing, he saw something. A crack in the ceiling. A maintenance hatch just above the Sovereign's head. A plan formed in an instant. A risk. A final gamble. He holstered his pistol and took a step forward. The Sovereign noticed. "Do you wish to beg, human?" "No," Elias said. "I wish to negotiate." The Sovereign paused. Curious. Elias raised a hand, feigning surrender. "You think you still have control. You don't. You're fighting the poison. Every breath you take is a battle. You might last minutes, maybe hours, but you will die." The Sovereign snarled. "So will you." Elias nodded. "Probably." And then he moved. Not for his gun, not for a weapon, for the hatch. He leapt, fingers catching the edge. The Sovereign reacted, throwing Lena aside to seize him. Asterisk, asterisk, exactly as Elias had planned, asterisk, asterisk. He ripped open the hatch and slammed his palm against the pressure override. The gravity failed. The air turned into a roaring void. The Sovereign howled as the sudden vacuum wrenched him from the ground. His claws scraped against the floor, trying to hold on. Elias was ready. He grabbed onto the ledge, anchoring himself as the Sovereign was pulled into the gaping abyss above. The ruler of the galaxy, the conqueror of Earth, the self-proclaimed God King of the Stars, was gone. The emergency shield snapped into place, sealing the chamber. Silence followed. Elias collapsed to the ground, chest heaving. Lena groaned, struggling to sit up. Blood dripped from her temple, but she was alive. She stared at him, dazed. What? What just happened? Elias swallowed hard. He fell. He said simply. The docking bay doors hissed open. The others were waiting. There was no time to stop. No time to think. It was time to end this. The docking bay was a war zone. Smoke curled through the vast chamber, mingling with the acrid scent of scorched metal and burning flesh. Gunfire rattled in short, controlled bursts, the sharp percussion of human-made weapons contrasting with the hissing energy blasts of alien counterfire. The bodies of fallen guards littered the floor. Zarvok enforcers and Hekari sentinels slumped over consoles, their ornate armor cracked and blackened from the ambush. The rebellion had begun. Elias and Lena staggered through the entrance, their clothes torn, faces smeared with blood. Some of it theirs, most of it not. The surviving humans turned toward them, eyes burning with the raw, electric energy of the impossible. They had done it. A man stepped forward, his rifle slung across his back. Dorian Hale, former military, former resistance leader, former prisoner. Now the closest thing they had to a commander. He took one look at them and nodded. Status. Elias swallowed hard, trying to slow his breathing. The poison worked. Most of the rulers are dead. He hesitated. The Supreme Sovereign. I ejected him into space. A hush fell over the gathered fighters. It was Lena who broke it. We don't know if he's dead. Dorian's expression darkened. Then we don't assume victory. He turned to the others. What's the situation here? A woman, June, wiped sweat from her brow. Guards are still trying to take back the hangar. We've sealed most access points, but they're hammering the outer blast doors. Elias could already hear it. Dull, rhythmic tremors. The Zarvok forces regrouping, preparing to breach. If they didn't move now, they would be trapped. Dorian gestured toward the transport ship at the center of the bay, an angular, gunmetal gray vessel designed for high-speed deployment. That's our way out. If we get off this station, we rendezvous with the others at the designated fallback point. Lena wiped blood from her lip. And then what? Dorian met her gaze. Then we end this. A shudder rolled through the station. The lights flickered, the deck beneath their feet vibrating with a low, ominous hum. The Zarvok were throwing everything into stopping them. June cursed. They're trying to override the security lockdown. If they break through. They won't, Elias said. His mind was already calculating. He had spent years studying this station, dissecting its vulnerabilities. He pointed toward a secondary control panel along the far wall. If I purge the power grid, we'll buy ourselves another 5 minutes. Dorian nodded. Do it. Elias sprinted, weaving through debris and bodies, reaching the console just as another explosion rocked the bay. Sparks rained down, alarms blaring, but his hand was steady as he worked. Override codes, authorization keys, a flickering display. He found a power relay. Purging in 3, 2, 1, asterisk asterisk. The lights died. For a moment, everything was plunged into darkness. The only illumination came from the eerie blue glow of emergency lights and the erratic flashes of gunfire. Elias turned, heart pounding. Go. That's all the time we'll get. Dorian and the others were already moving, covering the final stretch to the transport. A handful of remaining guards opened fire, but the humans cut them down with practiced efficiency. Lena reached the ramp first, turning back just as Elias ran to follow. Then the blast doors ruptured. A shock wave tore through the chamber. The force sent Elias sprawling, ears ringing, as a massive chunk of the hangar wall buckled inward. The Zarvok had forced their way in. A wave of them surged forward, their forms silhouetted against the fire-lit corridor beyond. The Sovereign's personal guard, not just soldiers, but elite war beasts, the enforcers of an empire built on blood. The humans opened fire, the bay igniting into a storm of chaos. Elias dragged himself up, his head spinning. He saw Lena, her rifle kicking against her shoulder as she cut down a charging brute. Saw Dorian hurl a grenade into a cluster of enemies, the concussive blast sending bodies flying. Saw June fall, a blade piercing her back, her scream swallowed by the deafening roar of war. Not now. Not when they were so close. Asterisk, asterisk. He grabbed his pistol, fired wildly, covering the others as they pushed toward the ship. The Zarvok were relentless, but they weren't thinking. They were still reeling from the poisoning, from the sudden turn of events. They had never considered the possibility of human defiance. The rebels reached the ship, one by one. Lena grabbed Elias, dragging him up the ramp as Dorian slammed his fist against the controls. We're leaving. Asterisk, asterisk now. Asterisk, asterisk. The engines roared to life. The bay erupted with laser fire as the Zarvok attempted to stop the inevitable. Elias barely made it inside before the ramp sealed shut. The ship lurched, thrusters igniting, ripping from the hangar just as another explosion tore through the station. Elias pressed a hand to the cold metal floor, panting, as the ship broke free into the abyss of space. A stunned silence filled the cabin. Dorian exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. We did it. No one spoke. No one celebrated. Because this wasn't over. Not yet. The void stretched infinitely before them, a sea of stars untouched by the ruin they had left behind. The stolen transport hurtled through the black, engines burning hot as they fled the station. Inside, the air was thick with exhaustion and the scent of blood. Elias sat against the cold metal wall of the cargo hold, his body aching from the fight, his mind racing with the weight of what they had done, what they had started. Lena sat beside him, silent, cradling her wounded arm. The blood had slowed, but her breathing was still uneven, her fingers twitching every so often like she was bracing for another attack that wouldn't come. Across the cabin, Dorian stood near the cockpit, his posture tense as he watched the others. The survivors were few, just over a dozen now. Some sat slumped against the walls, some clutched at wounds they couldn't afford to treat properly. Others stared at nothing, their minds still trapped in a battle they had barely escaped. June was gone. The thought lodged itself in Elias's chest, sharp and unrelenting. She had been laughing just days ago, talking about Earth like it was still a place they could return to. Now, she was another body left behind in the halls of their enemy. Lena's voice was hoarse when she finally spoke. How long until we reach the rendezvous? Dorian checked the NAV display. Less than an hour. His jaw tightened. Assuming we don't get intercepted. The words hung heavy in the air. They had struck a crippling blow to the galactic rulers. The Sovereign's death, if he was truly dead, would leave a power vacuum, a fracture in the Empire's foundations. But the Zarvok were wounded, not dead. And a wounded beast was always at its most dangerous. Elias pushed himself up, forcing the stiffness from his limbs. He moved toward the cockpit, standing beside Dorian as the ship's scanners flickered with incoming data. No pursuit. Not yet. But that didn't mean they were safe. Lena joined them, arms crossed. Even if we make it to the fleet, what then? Dorian exhaled. We hit them harder. Elias stared at the screen, the words forming before he could stop them. What if it's not enough? Lena flinched. The thought had been buried beneath their desperation to escape, but now it sat in the open, raw and unyielding. They had killed most of the rulers, but not all. The Empire still had armies, still had fleets that could burn entire systems to the ground. And humans Humans were still scattered, still enslaved on countless worlds, still seen as nothing more than labor and amusement for their alien overlords. Lena's voice was quieter this time. We knew this wouldn't end with one attack. Dorian nodded, but there was something else in his eyes. Something harder. We knew, he said, but the rest of the galaxy doesn't. Elias frowned. What do you mean? Dorian turned to him, the ghost of something like a grin tugging at his lips. We poisoned the rulers. That's not just an act of war. That's a statement. Word will spread. Other species that live under their rule will see what we've done. Elias felt a flicker of something cold in his chest. Hope. It was a dangerous thing, fragile and easily crushed, but he could feel it, threading through the ship like an unspoken current. Lena's expression shifted. You think others will rise up? Dorian shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not. But now they know it's possible. Elias thought of the slaves in the lower decks of the station, the ones who had fought alongside them, seizing their chance at freedom. He thought of the countless others still waiting, still bound in chains. A single ember was enough to start a fire. The ship jolted, pulling them back to the moment. The proximity alarms flared, the cockpit screens flickering with incoming warnings. Elias's breath caught. Tell me that's the fleet. Dorian's hands flew over the controls. The display resolved into a real-time scan of the surrounding space. Their rendezvous point was just ahead, a cluster of rogue human warships hiding in the shadow of Shattered Moon. But there was something else, a presence behind them, distant but closing fast. A Zarvok warship. Lena cursed. They found us. Dorian's grip tightened on the controls. How the hell? Elias's mind raced. The Empire's technology was sophisticated, but their stolen transport had been scrubbed of trackers. There was no reason they should have been followed unless. The answer hit him like a physical blow. It's him, Elias whispered. Lena turned to him, confusion flickering across her face. What? Elias's throat went dry. The Sovereign. The cabin went silent. Lena shook her head. No, he's dead. But the words fell hollow. Elias had seen the Sovereign pulled into the void, had felt the vacuum rip him from the station. It should have been impossible to survive, but should have been didn't mean was. Dorian's face was unreadable. If he survived, then he's coming to finish this. Lena exhaled sharply, a grim smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Good. Dorian glanced at her. She met his gaze without hesitation. Because this time, we don't run. The proximity alarm screamed louder. The Zarvok warship was closing in, its silhouette a hulking shadow against the void. Elias's heart pounded. They were outgunned, their ship barely armed, their bodies exhausted. But the fleet was ahead. Dorian's hands tightened on the controls. Hold on. The ship lurched forward, streaking toward their allies at breakneck speed. Behind them, the Zarvok vessel opened fire, plasma bolts tearing through the darkness. Elias braced himself. The war was not over. Not yet. But humanity had already done the impossible once, and they would do it again.